In the waning hours of June 12, 1988, a British racing driver named Jan Lammers guided a battered Jaguar XJR-9 through the Mulsanne Strait with a broken gearbox and nothing but fourth gear to rely on. Behind him, one of the most formidable racing machines ever built, a Porsche 962 piloted by three-time Le Mans champion Derek Bell, pursued relentlessly, drawing closer with every passing lap. The gap between them had narrowed to mere seconds. The entire future of British motorsport hung in the balance, and Lammers knew that if he downshifted, the gearbox would explode. On the other side of the world, in boardrooms from London to Stuttgart, executives held their breath. What they didn't know was that they were about to witness one of the greatest comebacks in endurance racing history. The story of Jaguar's 1988 Le Mans victory is not merely about a single race. It is the story of a company that had tasted supreme glory in the 1950s, watched that triumph fade into memory, and then spent 3 decades waiting for a second act. It is the story of how one chassis design, one engine, and the sheer determination of a British racing outfit could finally slay the German dragon that had ruled Le Mans since 1980. This is the tale of how Jaguar's 750 horsepower revenge unfolded across 3,313 miles of French tarmac, and why it still matters today. To understand 1988, you must first journey backward to 1957. That was the year Ivor Bueb and Ron Flockhart, piloting a Jaguar D-Type entered by the Scottish racing team Écurie Écosse, crossed the finish line ahead of all competitors at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It was Jaguar's 5th victory in 7 years, a dominance so complete, so absolute, that some believed the British mark had permanently altered the nature of endurance racing. The company had arrived at Le Mans in the early 1950s with sleek, low-slung machines powered by XK engines that seemed almost impossible to beat. In 1951 and 1953, Jaguar won with the legendary C-Type. In 1955, 1956, and 1957, the D-Type continued the dynasty. These were not simply racing machines. They were proof points for British engineering, mechanical sophistication, and manufacturing excellence. When a Jaguar won at Le Mans, it represented the triumph of design innovation over brute force, of aerodynamic sophistication over raw horsepower. Every victory was a statement that Britain could build better race cars than anyone else on the planet. The Jaguar brand became synonymous with endurance racing excellence. Wealthy enthusiasts and corporate sponsors alike believed that owning and racing a Jaguar meant you were aligned with the best. And then, silence. After 1957, the Le Mans victory column remained empty for Jaguar. The 1960s brought nothing. The 1970s arrived with the same emptiness. By the 1980s, a generation of racing fans had grown up without ever seeing a Jaguar win at La Sarthe. The company had tried. They had entered prototypes. They had partnered with private teams. Nothing worked. Each attempt ended in mechanical failure, driver error, or simple misfortune. By 1987, as Jaguar was being absorbed into the Ford empire, a moment of corporate humiliation that would define the marque's final independent years, it seemed the company's chance had passed. The past was genuinely past. History, it seemed, belonged to others now. While Jaguar languished in the desert of non-victory, Porsche ascended to the throne, beginning with the revolutionary 956 in 1982 and evolving through successive iterations of the 962. The Weissach-based manufacturer had created a racing machine that seemed unbeatable. Porsche had not simply won at Le Mans. They had conquered it with an almost surgical precision that reduced victory to an administrative formality. From 1980 to 1987, Porsche won Le Mans 6 consecutive times. That is not a winning streak. That is dominance. That is supremacy rendered in aluminum and carbon fiber. The Porsche 962 was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering. Powered by a turbocharged flat-six engine displacing somewhere between 2.6 and 3.2 liters, depending on the year and regulation class, the 962 produced around 750 horsepower in its most potent configurations. a figure that made it the equal of the most powerful production engines in the world, compressed into a machine that weighed less than most road cars. The engine was not the 962's only advantage. The aluminum monocoque chassis, developed from the earlier 956, provided a foundation of structural rigidity that allowed engineers to fine-tune suspension geometry with unprecedented precision. Advanced aerodynamics generated enormous downforce, allowing the 962 to corner at speeds that seemed to violate the laws of physics. More importantly, the 962 had proven itself reliable across the 24-hour distance. Porsche had engineered not just a fast car, but a fast car that would not break. This combination, raw speed married to mechanical robustness, made the 962 nearly impossible to beat. Every other manufacturer looked at the 962 and asked the same question: how do we compete against this? The answers, universally, were depressing. By 1987, when Hans Stuck, Derek Bell, and Al Holbert drove a works Porsche 962 across the finish line for the 7th consecutive Le Mans victory, Porsche seemed destined to dominate the circuit forever. After all, they had the money, the engineering talent, the experience, and the track record. Who could possibly mount a serious challenge? Enter Jaguar, a company that had every reason to believe 1988 could be different. Jaguar's return to Le Mans did not begin in 1988. It began in 1984, and it began with American John Cooper and his Group 44 racing team. Tired of watching Porsche dominate from the sidelines, Jaguar partnered with the Charleston, South Carolina-based outfit to develop a sports prototype powered by the Jaguar 512 engine. The car was fast, promising even, but it was not fast enough. In 1984, both Group 44 Jaguars failed to finish the race. In 1985, one managed to survive the distance and finish in 13th place overall, capturing the GTP category, but trailing far behind the leading prototype runners. It was a humbling result. What Group 44's efforts did accomplish, however, was prove that a Jaguar 512-powered prototype was theoretically viable. It could turn laps at competitive speeds. It could survive the night. The problem was not fundamental, it was refinement. The engineering was not wrong, it was just not good enough. Enter Tom Walkinshaw Racing. Walkinshaw was not a household name, but he was a racer's racer. Having cut his teeth in European touring car racing, where he had enjoyed considerable success piloting and engineering Jaguar XJS models in competition, Walkinshaw understood both the Jaguar brand and the demands of international-level motorsport. In 1985, TWR began work on what would become the XJR-9, a fresh design that incorporated lessons learned from both Group 44's attempts and the rapidly evolving Group C regulations governing prototype racing. The XJR-9 was a start. It was an improvement, but it was not yet a winner. The 1986 Le Mans 24 Hours saw Jaguar arrive with renewed hope. The cars were faster, the team was more professional, and yet, on the night of June 14th to 15th, bad luck struck. One car suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. Another experienced a transmission issue that forced a lengthy pit stop. The third machine fought valiantly but ultimately fell short in the closing hours. The team returned to England empty-handed, but not empty of purpose. They had been close. So close that you could taste it. 1987 brought another attempt, another entry of multiple cars, another night spent in battle against Porsche. But again, the gods of endurance racing were not kind to Jaguar. Mechanical troubles, reliability issues, and the superior speed of the Porsche Works team combined to deny Jaguar once more. By the autumn of 1987, as Ford completed its acquisition of Jaguar and the company's independence slipped away like water through fingers, it seemed that 1988 might be Jaguar's last realistic chance. The company had tried. They had tried in 1984, 1985, 1986, and 1987. They had spent millions of pounds. They had rebuilt cars multiple times. They had gathered some of the best engineering talent in the sport, and they had failed. If 1988 did not deliver, it might be decades, or forever, before another opportunity presented itself. In early 1988, Tom Walkinshaw's team unveiled a machine that looked like everything that came before it, but was fundamentally something else entirely. The XJR-9 was designed by Tony Southgate, an engineer of remarkable talent who understood that winning at Le Mans required balancing speed, reliability, efficiency, and the ability to survive 24 hours of continuous punishment. The XJR-9 was not simply a refinement of the XJR-8. It was an evolution that incorporated technological advances Southgate had absorbed from racing programs worldwide. At its core sat the Jaguar 5E12 engine, not the production XJS V12 as it was sold to road customers, but a racing variant that had been developed, refined, and engineered to produce extraordinary power. The 7.0-liter naturally aspirated V12 developed by Jaguar engineers and TWR's technical staff produced 750 horsepower at 7,200 revolutions per minute. More than that, it generated 828 newton-meters of torque at 5,500 revolutions per minute, a massive surge of pushing force that made the Jaguar accelerate with an authority that seemed to contradict its traditional, elegant lines. This was not a turbocharged engine trying to compensate for displacement through artificial breathing assistance. This was raw cubic capacity producing genuine power. The flat-plane crankshaft, the carefully ported cylinder heads, the fuel injection system designed by Zytec, every component had been optimized for a single purpose, producing 750 horsepower that would last for 24 hours. But engine power alone does not win races. What separated the XJR-9 from its predecessors was the chassis that wrapped around that engine. Southgate had designed a monocoque structure that combined carbon fiber and Kevlar composite materials, creating a structure that was simultaneously incredibly light and extraordinarily rigid. The chassis weighed just 881 kilograms, less than 1,950 pounds, yet it provided a structural foundation that allowed engineers to extract every ounce of performance from the suspension and aerodynamic systems. Speaking of aerodynamics, the XJR-9LM, the variant specifically developed for Le Mans, incorporated a revolutionary approach to bodywork. While the regular XJR-9 used a more conventional shape suitable for 1,000-kilometer sprint races, the LM variant was purpose-built for the specific demands of the Mulsanne Straight. Engineers realized that the straight section, which featured no chicanes in 1988 and allowed drivers to achieve extraordinary speeds, represented the single biggest advantage they could exploit over Porsche. The XJR-9 LM featured a specifically designed low-drag aerodynamic package with a shortened tail compared to the Porsche 962. The front splitter, the side panels, even the shape of the rear wing were optimized to reduce drag on the straight while maintaining sufficient downforce in the corners. The result was remarkable. The XJR-9 LM could reach 240 miles per hour down the Mulsanne Straight, approximately 15 miles per hour faster than the Porsche 962, which typically maxed out around 225 miles per hour in the same section. This speed advantage, generated not through engine power but through aerodynamic efficiency, represented a crucial edge. On every lap of the race, the Jaguar would gain time on Porsche in the Mulsanne section alone. Over 24 hours, with driver changes and laps racking up, that advantage could accumulate into something meaningful. The powertrain was completed with a March 5-speed gearbox that had been specifically designed for endurance racing demands. In principle, the gearbox was supposed to survive the entire race distance, transferring the engine's 750 horsepower through ratios that would allow the car to achieve maximum velocity on the straights while maintaining controllable speeds in the tight corners. In practice, the gearbox would become a central character in the drama about to unfold. In June 1988, Jaguar did not arrive at Le Mans with one experimental machine. They did not enter two cars and hope for the best. Instead, Jaguar arrived with 5 cars, 5 XJR-9 LM machines prepared to the highest standard, each one representing tens of thousands of pounds worth of engineering investment. each one a potential winner. It was a show of force unlike anything Jaguar had attempted before. It was also a declaration of intent. This year would be different. Tom Walkinshaw had structured the team with the precision of a Formula One operation: multiple crews, backup engines, spare chassis components, pit lane organization worthy of professional sports, and a management structure that understood every variable that could be controlled. Jaguar had secured major sponsorship from Silk Cut, the British cigarette brand, which adorned the cars in distinctive silver, red, and black livery. The team that would drive the cars to victory included three men: Jan Lammers, a Dutch driver who had competed in Formula One during the early 1980s, but had since focused on sports car racing; Johnny Dumfries, a Scottish aristocrat and skilled pilot; and Andy Wallace, a younger driver of exceptional talent who was hungry to prove himself at motorsport's highest levels. Other cars would be crewed with additional talent, including the legendary Martin Brundle, alongside other international drivers. Walkinshaw had even managed to convince 1969 Le Mans winner Jackie Ickx to serve as a consultant and advisor. This was not a team hoping to snatch an unlikely victory. This was a team that genuinely believed, that they could win. Their preparation had been thorough. Their cars had been tested. Their drivers had been chosen carefully. Now, with the race approaching, everything would depend on 24 hours of flawless execution against a Porsche team that had literally never failed to win since 1981. Qualifying for the 1988 24 Hours of Le Mans did not go according to Jaguar's script. The Porsche Works team, bringing three brand new 962s specifically prepared for this single race, qualified with extraordinary speed. Hans Stuck, one of Porsche's most experienced drivers, claimed pole position with a lap time of 3 minutes 15.6 seconds at an average speed of 155.4 miles per hour. Astronomical figures for a circuit-length average that included multiple corners. His qualifying lap featured a speed of 242.9 miles per hour down the Mulsanne Straight, made even more impressive by the absence of chicanes that would later be installed to slow traffic. The Porsche 962010, as it was designated, was unlike any 962 that had preceded it. Built specifically for 1988 rather than being a refinement of a previous year's model, this car featured a new 3.0-liter flat-six turbocharged engine with updated KK turbochargers, new Bosch Motronic management systems, and a reputed output of 880 horsepower, 30 horsepower more than the Jaguar's naturally aspirated V12. More concerning for Jaguar was not the power figure, but the Porsche team's demonstrated qualifying speed. They had shown that, at least across a single lap, they were faster. The best Jaguar could manage in qualifying was fourth place. It was a humbling position from which to begin a race against three works Porsches that seemed to have superior pace. The grid, however, does not win the race. The circuit wins the race. And at Le Mans, victory goes to the team that can combine speed, reliability, and strategy across 24 consecutive hours. Qualifying is merely prologue. The 1988 24 Hours of Le Mans began at 3 p.m. on Saturday, June 11th, under relatively cool and overcast conditions. The field assembled, engines fired to life, and the moment the starting lights turned green, immediately the race became what everyone anticipated: a battle between Porsche and Jaguar. In the opening laps, the Porsche 962S, with their qualifying spec-tuned engines and fresh vehicles, seized command. Hans Stuck, piloting the works car that had set pole, led from the start. But almost immediately, the script that Porsche had written began to unravel. Jan Lammers muscled his way up through the field in the lead Jaguar, demonstrating the kind of bravery and precision that separates good drivers from great ones. Within hours, the lead had swapped hands multiple times. The night brought chaos for both teams. A blocked fuel filter cost Klaus Ludwig 2 laps in the pole-sitting Porsche and forced a lengthy pit stop. Mechanical gremlins nibbled away at reliability, something Porsche traditionally prided itself on avoiding. One Jaguar, the third works entry, suffered a catastrophic gearbox failure around midnight with Raoul Boesel at the wheel, forcing an early retirement. Another Porsche, the works car assigned to Mario Andretti and his teammates, lost several laps repairing a water pump that had begun to leak. The race became a desperate dance between the two marques. The Jaguar chassis proved predictable and fast through the technical sections. The Porsche seemed to have superior absolute speed on the straights and in qualifying-type conditions. Every pit stop represented an opportunity for strategy adjustments. Every mechanical hiccup could prove decisive. By midnight, the positions had become uncertain. The race could have gone either way. As darkness deepened and the track cooled, the Porsche engineers had reason to believe their car might have what it took. The works machine, driven by Bell, Stuck, and Ludwig, three drivers who, between them, had won Le Mans 10 times previously, seemed to be managing fuel economy well. The Jaguar teams appeared to be struggling slightly with tire degradation in certain conditions. The Porsche narrative, 7 straight victories, could easily become 8 if just a few things broke the right way. As the race entered its 12th hour, 5 hours remained until dawn. This was the moment when classical Le Mans endurance racing tradition demanded its toll. Drivers grew tired. Pit crews made mistakes under fatigue. Reliability issues that had been dormant suddenly accelerated. Fuel consumption calculations made in calm daylight hours were tested against the reality of night driving, when a driver's inputs might be slightly imprecise, when concentration wandered just a fraction too far, when the margin between maintaining performance and degrading it disappeared entirely. The works Porsche 962, driven by Derek Bell, Klaus Ludwig, and Hans-Joachim Stuck, continued to battle the leading Jaguar. But as the night deepened, mechanical problems began to accumulate. A water pipe that had begun to leak grew progressively worse, forcing a pit stop to address what had initially seemed like a minor issue. Several laps were lost in repairs. The Porsche, which had been running in or near the lead, dropped back to a more distant position. The Jaguar entries, meanwhile, demonstrated the reliability that British engineers had built into them. While the cars were not problem-free, nothing survives 24 hours at Le Mans without some mechanical drama. They seemed to accept punishment with British stoicism. The XJR-9 LM, driven by Lammers, Dumfries, and Wallace, remained relatively trouble-free, accumulating laps and building a gap over the best remaining Porsche competitors. By dawn on Sunday, June 12th, the result was becoming clearer. Jaguar had 3 cars still running and competitive. Porsche was down to single-car efforts, with their works machines having suffered enough mechanical trauma to drop them out of realistic contention for overall victory. The race, it seemed, was Jaguar's to lose. But then, with approximately 2 hours remaining, catastrophe struck. The Jaguar's gearbox, that supposedly robust component that had been engineered for 24-hour reliability, began to disintegrate. The car driven by Jan Lammers found itself unable to shift properly from second gear to third gear. When the gear lever was moved into the third gear position, it jumped back out of gear entirely, as if repelled by an invisible force. Third gear had become inaccessible. But when Lammers tried to shift from third to fourth, something extraordinary occurred. The gear locked in place. Fourth gear selected and engaged, but it could not disengage. The transmission became stuck, unable to shift to any other ratio. For a car with a top speed of 245 miles per hour and corners requiring downshifts to 40 to 50 miles per hour, a locked-in fourth gear was catastrophic. It was the kind of mechanical failure that should, by every law of motorsport probability, result in a retirement. Lammers, though, possessed the kind of mental toughness that separates champions from merely talented drivers. He remembered that Raoul Buzel, driving one of the other Jaguars earlier in the race, had suffered a similar gearbox problem before his car was retired. Buzel had communicated back to the pits that the secondary gearbox shaft had failed, and at that moment, Lammers made a decision that would define the final 2 hours of the race. He did not tell anyone about the problem. Instead, he began piloting the car with extraordinary smoothness. In fourth gear alone, the Jaguar had adequate power to maintain competitive speeds on the straights. In the corners, Lammers had to work with the reduced grip that lower speeds provided. Every input through the steering wheel had to be precise. Every acceleration had to be measured. The car became, in effect, a completely different machine. Not the high-powered prototype that had been engineered, but a carefully controlled platform that could only function if the driver exercised absolute precision. When the Jaguar came in for its final pit stop, with less than an hour remaining, the crew saw the car leave the pit lane stuck in fourth gear. The pit crew exchanged glances. Something was seriously wrong. But Walkinshaw's management structure, honed through decades of racing experience, understood that if Lammers wanted them to know what was happening, he would tell them. The crew maintained radio silence. They did not ask questions. They did not create the panic that might have ripped the metaphorical victory from Jaguar's grasp. What they did was prepare for every contingency. They prepared for a potential engine failure. They prepared for a crash. They prepared for the car to simply stop on track. They prepared for anything except what actually happened. Lammers would drive the remaining laps in fourth gear, maintaining speed through sheer smoothness and control, bringing the car across the finish line despite a gearbox that should have ended his race. Meanwhile, the works Porsche 962, driven by Derek Bell, Klaus Ludwig, and Hans-Joachim Stuck, was beginning to close the gap. The rain that had fallen earlier in the morning had dried, and the track had returned to its fast, dry condition. The Porsche, which had been recovering from its various mechanical misadventures, began to claw back the deficit. Bell, one of the greatest Le Mans drivers who ever lived, was driving with the kind of precision that suggested a comeback was possible. By 40 minutes before the finish, the gap between the lead Jaguar and the pursuing Porsche had narrowed to mere seconds. Bell was mounting a genuine threat. The Porsche, with its flat-six turbo engine now running smoothly and the team having resolved its mechanical issues, seemed capable of actually catching the Jaguar. 50,000 spectators, the majority of them British supporters of Jaguar, began to sense that their national marque's victory could actually be stolen in the final moments. But it was too late. Bell drove magnificently, absolutely magnificently, demonstrating the kind of skill that made him a three-time Le Mans winner. But the Jaguar, piloted by Lammers through 2 hours of locked-in fourth-gear torture, had just enough speed to hold on. At 3 p.m. local time, Jan Lammers crossed the finish line, his Jaguar XJR-9 completing 394 laps and covering 3,313 miles in 24 hours. The Porsche 962 crossed the line exactly 2 minutes and 30 seconds behind. Jaguar had won. The crowd erupted. British flags waved frantically. The Silk Cut Jaguar, painted in silver and red, was engulfed by a sea of celebrating mechanics, engineers, and team members. The television cameras panned to show the emotion on the faces of the drivers as they stepped out of their cars, soaked with sweat and the physical toll of 24 hours of driving, understanding that they had just written themselves into motorsport history. For Jaguar, this was more than a race victory. This was vindication. This was proof that the company that had built the most beautiful racing machines of the 1950s still possessed the engineering capability to compete at the highest levels of international motorsport. Jaguar had been written off. Jaguar had been acquired by Ford. Jaguar's independence had been stripped away. And yet, on the Circuit de la Sarthe, a team of British engineers and drivers had just proven that the marque could still win on the world's greatest stage. For Porsche, the loss represented something more troubling. The 962 had won at Le Mans for 7 consecutive years. Porsche had seemed unbeatable, a manufacturer whose combination of engineering genius and racing expertise appeared to put them beyond reach. The 1988 defeat suggested that no dominance is permanent. No matter how well-engineered your machine, no matter how large your advantage, someone with greater hunger and different approaches could find a way through. But perhaps most significantly, the 1988 victory represented the last act of a particular era in sports car racing. It was the final victory for a naturally aspirated engine at Le Mans before regulations would shift. It was the last significant victory for a British manufacturer in major international sports car racing for many years. The XJR-9 LM, despite its triumph, represented the end of something rather than the beginning. Jaguar would win again at Le Mans in 1990 with the related XJR-12, but nothing would quite match the emotional power of that 1988 moment, the end of a 31-year drought, the triumph of will over circumstance, and a team discovering that sometimes the greatest victories come not through superior technology, but through the refusal to accept defeat, even when everything suggests that defeat is inevitable.